Chapter 2: Caleb's Dreams. As the young man ran naked through the seemingly endless field of tall grasses, he could scarcely feel the wind against his bare brown skin, nor could his eyes clearly see the dusty golden sky above. The only exceptions were the occasional beams of sunlight which streamed and trickled their way to the ground. Before him lay a thickening layer of haze and smoke which seemed to engulf everything around him. There was something close behind him, he could sense it, and whatever it was closing in for him. What manner of evil could it be? He wondered. The young man stopped suddenly, turning his head slowly from side to side to hear the falls of feet in the tall grass behind him and the crunching of the soil. He could sense that something or someone was closing in on him as he heard the swishing sound of parting grasses behind him. He tossed his dark hair behind his head and continued running again. He could feel his young heart pounding harder and harder in his ever-tightening chest, until he couldn't bear the pain any longer and he fell to the ground in the field of grass before him. With his face buried deeply into the grass as to hide all the light, he could then begin to smell the sweetness of the field, mingled in with the musty odors of the moist soil beneath. Where was his pursuer? He wondered. "Just get it over with, why don't you?" he muttered, as he covered his head with his hands. There was no answer. The sound of the footfalls behind him had stopped. Seconds silently passed. He was afraid to lift his head and look behind him, in fear of what he might find, so he lay there in the field for what seemed an eternity, waiting for the final strike, the kill, but none came. Run was his only thought, run. The young man jumped up from where he lay and plowed forward through the grasses once more. The only sound he could hear now was the sound of his heart pounding again in his chest. Faster and faster his thin muscular legs carried him forward until he finally reached a clearing. He rested a while to catch his breath and looked around. As he turned and looked down at his feet, he noticed the tall grass that was there before had disappeared. The ground below him had now hardened into a smooth onyx black surface. He pressed forward into the fading hazy light. "Caleb," called a soft whispering voice, as if from the air and wind. He stopped, sniffed, squinted, and searched with all his senses, but nothing. Then as he looked around, he realized his path had led him into a corridor of sorts. Surrounding him in all directions were cages. Curious, he moved to the cage that was closest to him and peered inside it. There were several people tucked away tightly within the cage, and as soon as they sensed his presence, they began reaching and grabbing for him. "Help us," a chorus of raspy voices pleaded. I'm sorry, I can't," stuttered a nervous Caleb. He had turned to run back the way he had just came when he suddenly saw someone standing ahead of him in the mist. "Who's there?" he shouted. There was no answer. "I know you're there. Reveal yourself. Why do you hide from me?" He squinted in the fading light to get a better look. It was a shadowy-looking thing. All those moans and groans of those poor souls in their cages haunted him enough, but now to be followed by this beast? He turned and ran once again as before, as fast as his legs could carry him. "Caleb, help us. Please, Caleb," pleaded the groaning voices locked in their cages. Caleb was determined he was not about to stop and continued running even faster. Cages upon cages and moans upon moans, he passed by them all, wanting to help them, but he knew there was nothing he could do for any of them. When he reached what looked like an opening, he suddenly stopped. "Caleb," called another voice again. It was a different voice this time, a pleasant-sounding voice. "Caleb, we've been waiting for you," urged the pleasant voice. Caleb turned to see a young dark woman standing behind him. As beautiful as any he had ever seen in his clan or any of the other clans he had met in his travels. She had a smooth, enticing voice that melted his heart. And of course, those eyes, her eyes that pierced into his soul. Her face and skin were as golden brown as the leaves before winter, and her dark flowing hair was even longer and wavier than his, and although she appeared to be about the same age as he, there was a sharp cunning in her words. "Do I know you?" he asked. She approached closer, as Caleb backed away. "No. But I know you." She continued. "We've been waiting here for you, Caleb," claimed the young woman as she stopped her approach. "Who are you?" he asked. As beautiful as she was, he couldn't shake the fear of her. She smiled at him, attempting to draw Caleb nearer. "We've a place ready for you here, with us. No need to run anymore," she promised, motioning towards one of the cages. "Come, Caleb," she continued, "you will be safe here." Caleb looked, and there was a brand new cage, with its door wide open. Above the door was a steel sign, and it had a name inscribed on it, but in the fading light he couldn't read clearly what it said. He glanced at her again, then at the sign, and then he stepped closer to get a better view. "Caleb, of the clan Elgin," proclaimed the writing on the sign. Caleb's eyes widened and his heart began to pound in his chest once more. "This cage is meant for me," he realized. The beguiling young woman continued smiling at him and repeating his name with her alluring voice as she moved closer towards him. Caleb heard another voice, calling his name. "Caleb, this path is not yours," urged another voice. It was a familiar voice, without any deception from within. He quickly turned to see where the voice came from. It was the outline of an old man hidden in shadows, between the rays of flickering light. He could not distinctly make out who it was, but felt a sense of familiarity, as if he knew this man well. Caleb stepped closer towards the shadow to get a better look. "Stephen, is that you?" whispered Caleb hesitantly. "Is this some kind of trick you're playing on me?" "Follow my voice, Caleb. I will guide you towards your path," vowed the man in the shadows. Caleb turned around to look for the young woman again, and as he did, he noticed that her once pleasing appearance had now changed. The young girl had transformed somehow. She had been replaced by a horrible-looking creature. And then there came the creature's voice, which had been alluring and inviting, but was now deep, commanding, and stern. "No, Caleb, your place is here, now." The beast growled and stepped towards him with its hands reaching out to grab onto him. "There will be no freedom, but that which we decide for you." For a second or two, Caleb wanted to fight the beast. He wanted to kill the beast that was both threatening him as well as terrifying him. From the shadows behind him, he felt a strong hand take hold of his shoulder. "It's too early. It's not time for you now. Run, Caleb," roared the older man's voice from the shadows. Caleb turned around to see him, but he was gone. "You must leave now. There will be a time to fight, later." As he turned back to face the creature, something or someone blocked the beast's path as it reached out with a long, tenuous arm to grab onto him. Caleb quickly turned and ran back the way he had come as he heard the most hideous of screams imaginable coming from behind him. And then Caleb awoke. "Caleb, wake up, Caleb, you all right?" came the familiar deep voice of Caleb's brother Stephen. Caleb struggled to open his sleepy eyes and looked up from where he slept. "Brother, it's time to wake up," insisted Stephen, who was standing over Caleb's cot, shaking his shoulders to bring him out of his apparent nightmare. Caleb groggily reached his hands up to his forehead to rub away the sweat. "Great, just another dream," he thought, relieved. "You okay, little brother?" asked Stephen, lifting his muscular hands away from Caleb's shoulders, yet holding them in air, as if he might be called upon at any moment to continue. "More nightmares, I suppose?" Caleb nodded. Stephen, who had recently turned 19, was now nearly 3 seasons older than Caleb. Being over 19 years of age now meant that he was old enough to be considered as an adult son within the Elgin clan. This consideration placed a great deal of responsibility on any adult son within the clan, since the expectation of the elders was that the adult son was now duty-bound to serve the clan's needs first, their family's needs second. "The morning sun is coming up, little brother, and it's nearly time to start our work for the day," commanded Stephen. "Mother's preparing the morning meal and it will be ready soon, so lazy bones must get up and move," ordered Stephen, who was now squatting down to reach for something under Caleb's cot. "Dad's expecting us to help him get the field plowed for planting," he urged, as he stared at Caleb with his steel blue eyes. Stephen arose to his feet and stood quietly, continuing to stare at Caleb as if somehow that might convince Caleb of the urgency of the moment. "He's expecting that help today," barked Stephen. Stephen then turned and left. Standing now nearly 6 feet tall, Stephen sometimes appeared as a giant, like from one of the fables that Caleb often enjoyed reading as a child. Caleb sat up and rested on his elbows and watched his brother as he left the tent through the door flap. Caleb often worried about disappointing Stephen. He looked up to him and worked even harder to live up to his expectations, as well as those of his father, Uriah. Caleb glanced carefully around at everything within his tent, first his bedroll, next his linens, and then finally at his chest, which was covered in beads of sweat. The sun was now about to come up, and the chill of morning would pass as the tent would slowly begin to warm up. Caleb gathered his strength and rose up off of his cot. He stood up as high as possible, stretching his tall, brown sinewy body as far as he could, yawning to shake off the grogginess. Then Caleb moved again, staggering slightly to the changing room at the back of his tent. "These dreams take a lot out of me," he thought, as he shook his head. Caleb began to change out of his bed linens. Reaching out, he grabbed a towel from off the washstand and set it down on the table, immediately tossing his head down into the water bowl, turning it quickly from side to side to hastily clean up. Caleb reached over and picked up the towel to dry his face and hair, then changed into his work clothes and threw on some fresh trousers before heading out of the tent. "Good morning, Caleb. My goodness, you look like you've had a rough night," greeted Sarah, as she whizzed behind Caleb with a hot pan full of sizzling bacon and eggs. Caleb caught himself sniffing the air as she set the last pan of food on the table for the morning meal. When she passed by him again, she reached over and affectionately rubbed her fingers through his long brown hair as he was sitting down at the table. The air was still a bit chilly this morning, but Caleb knew it wouldn't take long to warm up as the sun climbed higher into the sky. In the trees around their camp, he could hear the meadowlarks singing cheerfully their morning songs as he again caught the smell of the eggs and bacon frying in the pan. The sounds and smells of spring were all around him now, and Caleb breathed in deeply, closing his eyes as he used his senses to help forget the unpleasant memory of his early morning nightmare. "Good morning, Mother," he mumbled quietly as he opened his eyes again and reached for a fresh plate and some eating utensils that had been laid out before him on the table. "Your brother told me we're having another bad dream this morning. Is that true, Caleb?" Sarah asked. "Yes, Mother, another dream," he moaned. Caleb looked at his mother and rolled his eyes slightly as she passed behind him. "I saw that, Caleb. Talk to me about it. Tell me about your dream." "Is it the same dream you've been having?" she asked inquisitively. "No, this one was different. I was running away from someone and there were cages," and he paused, trying to remember every detail, but some details of this dream he felt would be better off forgotten. "Well, nothing about this dream really made much sense," explained Caleb. Caleb often felt it hard to explain his dreams to anyone else, except for his mother, but lately he had been keeping his visions secret to even her. Not that she ever made him feel awkward about it, quite the opposite. When Caleb was younger, she had always been helpful and supportive of his visions or dreams, when others would often shun him because of them. But now, Caleb felt it necessary to start understanding these dreams better himself, rather than relying on others to help interpret them. Sarah continued setting the morning meal at the table while cooking up a fresh batch of butter biscuits in the oven in the middle of camp. Caleb watched and admired her for how she worked just as hard as many of the older men in the clan, yet was never one to complain. It was rumored that many of the other women were as envious of her beauty as much as they were her strength, but Caleb admired his mother most, for her knowledge of books and stories. His mother Sarah had learned to read as a child and, as some of the other women were allowed to do, spent her days teaching the other children to read. She was expected, according to Zechariah, to spend most of the day teaching the children to read and understand the stories of the Bible. Zechariah, along with several of the older clan members, considered recreational reading a waste of time. Secretly, however, many of the mothers would teach their sons and daughters to read other books also, despite Zechariah's rules. Sarah sat down across the table from him and looked at him sympathetically. No one else was around yet. "Caleb, I believe God gives us dreams for a reason. Maybe God is trying to tell you something through your dreams. Did you ever stop to think about that?" she asked. Caleb frowned and grabbed one of the warm butter biscuits from the center of the table. He savored his biscuit, thinking to himself, "You remember the story of Joseph that we learned about from Elder Isaac last month, don't you?" Sarah asked. "Yes, Mother, I do." But all Joseph ever did was just interpret others' dreams, continued Caleb, somewhat skeptically, wondering where she was leading the conversation. No, Caleb, he did much more than that. If you remember, he also had dreams of his own, continued Sarah. It was his dreams that were to prove his destiny over Egypt, even over Israel. Perhaps your dreams might one day prove your destiny as well, continued Sarah, as she noticed Uriah approaching the table. All right, what are you two gabbing about now? Asked Uriah as he sat down at the table, grabbing a plate of food and butter biscuits for himself. More dreams from our little dreamer? Sarah shot Uriah an expression of mild impatience. Your son has been learning his lessons well, and naturally he's curious about what God's purpose for his gift might be, she explained. The least you could do is take some interest in it, insisted Sarah, never letting up on her stern gaze towards Uriah, who seemed oblivious to her gaze. You have some gravy ready for these biscuits? He asked gruffly. Uriah was a large, somewhat husky man, with long dark hair and brown eyes just like Caleb, but with squared muscular shoulders like Stephen. Caleb guessed his father to be nearly 41 seasons in age. He was one of the elders of the clan, but not one for spending too much of his extra time reading. Not that his father didn't consider it important, mind you, it was just that working hard, plowing, seeding, and providing food for the clan were more important tasks in his eyes. He regarded reading as a luxury he could ill afford, especially if it meant that his family or clan might go hungry. It is right here. Just help yourself and be sure to save enough for Stephen and the girls. Sarah retorted, grabbing a hot pan of fresh gravy and placing it down sternly on the table in front of Uriah, as if to emphasize the point. Sarah then glanced over to Caleb as she continued, winking at him with eyes nearly as blue as his brother Stephen's. Caleb, you keep listening to your dreams. I think that God is going to use you for some greater purpose with those dreams of yours. Caleb smiled meekly, not wishing to be a part of any argument, but grateful for his mother's encouragement. Humph, voiced Uriah, as he scooped up some of the heated gravy and poured it over his biscuits, seemingly not taking any offense to Sarah's touting. Caleb looked up keenly at his mother as she spoke to Uriah, carefully measuring her expressions. Even as brusque as his father Uriah could often be, Sarah very much loved his father, and he knew that his father loved her as well. He could see it in their eyes as they looked at each other. It often seemed as if everything in the clan had a time and place, even love. Unfortunately, love often fell under the same rule as most things, only if for the good of the clan. Caleb hoped that someday those rules would change for him, his family, and the clan. Stephen walked over and stood next to Caleb, taking some of the morning meal for himself before finding a place to sit at the table across from Caleb. He was silent, distant, and seemed distracted by other matters. I say we leave the study of the holy books to Elder Isaac or Elder Zechariah, while we concentrate on building up strength in these two boys. We certainly have plenty of work ahead for us today, barked Uriah, glancing sternly at Caleb and Stephen. I need you two today to help me plow and ready the fields, so we can plant seed before the rains come. Uriah looked up at the sky. Don't want to get caught short like we did last season, reminded Uriah, finishing his biscuits and grabbing some of the meat left in the pan and thrusting it onto his plate. Well, husband, I think the boys know what you need all too well. Every day there's just more work to do, more plowing, more seeding, more of this and more of that. When will we ever settle down and find a place to just live? Retorted Sarah, as she rose and took away some of the empty pans and plates from the table. I'm going to go wake up the girls and get them their morning breakfast, while you three plan your day, sighed Sarah. The clan had been on the move since shortly after the twins were born, several seasons now. Sarah couldn't begin to guess the miles they've traveled in that time. But she was tired of the nomadic life, as were many of the others in the clan. It was time, she thought, to stop and settle down, but unfortunately the decision would have to be made by their leader, Zechariah, not her. Uriah watched her out of the corner of his eye as she took the plates away. He reached over with one hand and patted and squeezed her gently on the side as she walked away. I hope you cooked up some extra for yourself this morning. You know, it wouldn't hurt you to eat a little more. Sarah turned and caught his eye, with an eyebrow raised. Uriah winked at her. Humph, voiced Sarah, half smiling. Uriah waited until she was gone, then turned to his sons and spoke in a low voice. We may even start working on building a new barn soon, chortled Uriah. Gauging by their reaction, he could tell Stephen and Caleb were surprised. And then, when we have the supplies, maybe a house too. You mean that we're going to? Stephen started to ask in a loud voice. Uriah quickly hushed his son. Yes, the council discussed this just a few nights ago. Elder Zechariah and all the men agreed. This is a good place for us to settle down, at least for the time being, explained Uriah. This brought subdued cheers from the two. That's good news. I'll guess that mother doesn't know yet, asked Stephen. Not yet. As a matter of fact, very few in the clan know about it yet, so you two keep quiet about this. Elder Zechariah is planning to deliver a special message on the next Sabbath telling everyone the news, whispered Uriah. But you know what this is going to mean, don't you? He asked, casting a stern gaze at his two sons. Stephen and Caleb looked at each other quizzically and shook their heads. No more sleeping in tents? Caleb innocently suggested, bringing a hushed laugh from his father and brother. Well, that may be true, but it means there's more work ahead for all of us, more planting, cutting wood and trading with the other clans in the area for any food or materials we might need, answered Uriah. He finished chewing his last bite of meat. This is why we need to start the fields right away. Those early crops will be our main source of trade. Caleb and I will go and get the horses ready, father, offered Stephen. Good. We'll start on the north field first. It'll be the easiest one to get started, assured Uriah. I will go and get the seed ready. Uriah stood up and backed away from the table, letting out a loud belch as he did. Your mother, what a cook, offered a seemingly satisfied Uriah, as he then turned and left. Caleb watched carefully as his father walked down the outer trail and towards the north field. Once Caleb was sure that his father was out of earshot, he turned back to his brother. Stephen, can we go out to the cave this afternoon and look for more books? Caleb asked. Stephen shot Caleb a stern glance. Be careful what you say, you'll get us both in trouble. Caleb frowned. He had already finished all the books he brought back from their trip nearly 3 weeks ago. He and his brother had a few dozen books between the two of them, and Caleb had his favorites, but he saw several others in the cave that he was hoping to trade. One book he found recently especially interested him, The Swiss Family Robinson. He felt a close kinship with Fritz and Ernest in the story and could see himself as a cross between the two boys. He would like to bring more books back with him, but Stephen said that would arouse too much suspicion with Mother. Caleb knew that eventually they would have to tell her about the cave, but the longer they put it off, the better. We have a lot of work to do this week, Caleb. Maybe, if we finish work early for Father before the next Sabbath, I'll ask his permission to let us go fishing again, Stephen suggested. Caleb's countenance lifted. Caleb, you must understand, we can't tell anyone about the cave or the books. Not yet anyway. Stephen paused for a second as his thoughts drifted off. Anyway, you know we're not supposed to be spending so much of our free time reading. Lucky for you and I that Mother enjoys seeing us read all the time. Caleb nodded. Stephen, you saw all the books in there. There must be hundreds and hundreds. How do you think they all got there? I don't know, Caleb. You remember the stories that Elder Isaac always tells the children about the people who used to live here long ago, before the Great Cataclysm? Caleb nodded. You think they put all those books in there? Maybe. I would guess that they were hoping to save them from being destroyed. But it's those crates that I especially want to look inside. Caleb watched as Stephen's gaze seemed to drift off. Stephen finished his meal and started to leave the table. Caleb reached up and stopped him first. What's the matter, Stephen? Something bothering you? Caleb asked. Stephen thought for a moment and then bent low over the table and spoke in a quiet voice. Word is going around that Elder Zachariah and the council will be calling for a meeting concerning all the eldest sons next month to arrange for selection of future wives, he explained, rolling his eyes. Caleb's eyes widened. Does Mother know? I don't think so, muttered Stephen. Have you told her about you and Nina Miller? No. Not yet. And don't you dare breathe a word about it to Mother or Father either. Stephen growled and walked swiftly away. The tradition of selecting future wives had been one of the old traditions that many of the younger clan members would like to see abolished. As Caleb began to clear away some of the dishes, his mother returned with the twins Elena and Jessica following close behind her to the table for morning meal. It's okay, Caleb, I'll take care of this mess, Sarah offered, motioning for Caleb to follow his brother. You go ahead and get ready with Stephen to help your father. Elena and Jessica were barely 5 seasons old and looked like mirror images of each other. With their long brown hair tied up behind their heads and the lightly colored robes they both wore, Caleb could barely distinguish the two of them. Caleb helped his sister Elena to the table, pouring some juice for her to drink. She looked up and smiled at Caleb as he did this. Thank you, Caleb. Can you play ball with us this morning? She asked. Sorry, Elena, Stephen and I must help Father ready the fields, maybe. This evening, before sunset, he offered. Elena smiled along with Jessica, who was already helping herself to some of the biscuits on the table. Caleb smiled, thinking about how different the two sisters were, just as how much they looked alike. Jessica, you're a hungry little monster, teased Caleb. Little Jessica looked up at Caleb and smiled again, and in between bites of her food, was making a low growling sound. Meanwhile, Sarah continued tending to the twins as she noticed Caleb still standing by the side of the table, fidgeting. She paused, working to look up at Caleb. Is something wrong? She asked. It was the dream I had this morning, continued Caleb, with a hint of discontentment in his voice. I know, I'm sorry, we were about to talk about it, weren't we? It really bothered you, didn't it? Same dream as you've had before? No. This one was different. There were people in cages, and a beast was chasing me, and it was trying to catch me and put me in one of the cages too, but I ran. Then there was also this man telling me to follow him, follow my path, he said. Caleb paused. What do you think all that means? Sarah's expression changed as she heard him finish telling her about his dream. Sarah got the girls' meals set up and stopped with her hands resting on her hips. She looked Caleb in the eye. I'm not sure, Caleb. We'll have to talk about this again tonight after you finish your work. I'll think about it today while you are away, okay? Caleb nodded, turned and readied himself to join with his brother Stephen. Sarah watched as Caleb walked away. May God go with you, my son, she softly whispered to herself.
You have been listening to Caleb Elgin, The Rise of the Clans by David E. Farmer. Also available on Amazon Kindle. More chapters coming soon. Thank you for listening. Have a great day. Bye-bye.